Welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith. Every week on this podcast, we talk about all things mental health, sometimes stress or anxiety. Perhaps you're burned out. Well, this is the podcast for you. We sit down with the wonderful counselors at Crosswinds Counseling and have a great conversation every week. Let's dive into this week's episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. I'm your host, Curtis Smith, and today Michael Megonnell is back on the podcast. Michael, thank you for being back with us.
Glad to be here, Curtis.
We're talking today about a topic that, impacts a lot of people, couples, and how men and women approach relationships and what they want out of relationships. Very different things. We are wired differently. I would argue on purpose, by design. So give me some big picture thoughts around that before we dive in a little bit deeper. Couple goals. What are couples coming into relationships hoping for and looking for?
Okay, so the big idea that I'll be talking about today is I coined the term treasured versus respected. There's a lot of different literature out there. I think love versus respect is one that you typically hear. I didn't like that because both men and women want to feel loved. We all have a need to feel loved deeply. It's just, what is it which ways, how do we expect to get love? Or how do we expect someone to show us love is probably the better way of phrasing it.
So treasured and respected are really just forms of love. Or how we receive it and how we perceive being loved.
Yeah, it's honestly, the other good book is The 5 Love Languages. But the reason why I didn't like that, or I typically don't talk about that with my clients, is because it's a lot more nuanced in practice. Because it depends on how you're raised, what you're valued, and if you can think about it in terms of respect and treasured, you get a little bit more of a deeper picture. There's also a book called Encaptured, or it's like Encaptured or Enraptured, and I think, but it's by Jim Wilder or Jim Eldridge, who wrote Wild at Heart, and it's basically the woman's side of that, and the whole premise of the book is a woman wants to be valued and seen as this beautiful thing. And it's that's unveiling her beauty, and it's funny because you can think about women, and a lot of they're taught to cover themselves up and be modest and stuff. Well, what's the purpose of that is because one of the most valuable things that women have is their beauty and wanting to be valued. And so then sharing that in a marriage relationship, it's okay, how does the husband show the wife that she is the most beautiful woman in the world? And it's funny, you can watch, my wife and I often watch TikToks, and this theme comes up a lot where the wife is asking for that, and the husband's like, what are you talking about? Why do you need that?
I was going to guess right at the start of the conversation that treasured was the female perspective, and respect is what men would like. Talk more about that. So that was kind of a very quick surface level viewpoint of women wanting to be treasured. Before we talk about men wanting to be respected, what else is it about being treasured that really speaks to women's heart in some of the couples maybe that you've worked with? What have you seen firsthand there?
I would say my wife's taught me the most in this department.
Sure.
And it's really about showing her that she's the most important thing in my life, and it's funny because even just being her emotions are important to me. What she does, what makes her feel comfortable is important to me. And, again, it's just having her as this, again, thinking of it as a precious stone that I really value and take and want to, keep safe. And again, the reason why I like that is because it's okay, what's your wife's history in coming up to that? Because how she knows you care for her is going to be dictated by how she grew up, and what she might have been lacking in previous relationships, different things like that. So it's really about diving in and saying like, okay, I know my wife wants me to treasure her or value her above all other things. What is it that makes my, like, what can I do for my wife, and how does she want me to show that specifically on a daily basis?
Yeah, part of this to me, just as a man, seems to be driven by the behavior of men. Let me just make it personal. I can get consumed by work. I can get way too into sports, and there's one sports team in particular that I care too much about. I can get obsessed with improving my golf game. Yep. I can get consumed by a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. And I feel like sometimes that might come off to my wife as, boy, all you ever talk about is work. Mm-hmm. All you ever talk about is this team. All you ever talk about is wanting to get to the golf course Saturday. Like, am I important to you? Do you care about me? Am I the most important thing? So it seems like sometimes men's behavior might drive this need for women to be treasured.
Oh yeah. Well, and again, that's the dynamic of like, if your wife isn't getting this met, she's going to like kind of start pushing, and that's where you can be like, oh, why is my wife so nagging? Well, you're not, giving her what she needs in that department. And it's funny because one of the TikToks that my wife showed me and we laughed about was women laying in bed at night, like going to their husbands like, do you like me? And he's like, I've been married to you for 5 years. Of course I like you. And she's like, but do you like me? And she's like, and it's that thing of like, and my wife said this to me many times, am I your best friend? And I was like, you're my wife. I love you. And she's like, but am I your best friend? And so I was like, yes, you're my best friend. So in figuring out, okay, how do I also show that, engage with that? And what's funny is it's like, all right, I have to build that also in myself and be like, okay, how do I love my wife and with my whole body? And talking about why would God design it that way is men, again, we're more interested in things typically on the scale. And women are more interested in relationships. Not a bad thing, just the way it goes. But for me to be a well-rounded individual, I have to learn how to care about relationships. Well, if the most important person in my life cares about relationships and I want to have a good relationship with them, I got to learn. Yeah. Or otherwise there's going to be problems.
For sure. Let's flip it and talk about being respected. That's what men desire. How do you see that typically play out in the couples that you work with and in your own life?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it's like, okay, again, a woman wants to be close, and a lot of it comes too with like, it comes out in conflict. At least this is where I would say I've noticed it the most with my wife and I, because she'll want, like, if we're in a conflict, she'll want me to come and give her a hug, and she'll want me to like be close to her and show her like, hey, no matter what your emotions you're going through, I'm here. I'm taking care of you. I do not. Like, when it's funny because like, sometimes my wife will say, go away, I don't want to talk to you. And she doesn't want me to go away. She wants me to stay. When I say, and there was one time specifically, I remember when we were really early on in our marriage, I was upset. And I said, I need to get away. And she held on to me. And she like held me tight. And I could literally feel myself shaking. Because I was like, let go of me. I need to leave the room, But it was that respect of like, when I said it, I meant like I need to take a break and I need this to be respected. And also it's thinking about like, all right, what's most important to us? As men, where do we put our value? And respecting our opinion on things like, being able to, again, talk about like the things, our sports teams or our golf swing, and being like, yeah, this is the things that are important to us and we value. And then how does our wives respond to that? Do they respect our opinion on it, look for us for advice? And again, those kind of things where it's, not as relational, but it's like, come to me for help, come to me to provide for you and respect me as that provider or something.
So we talked a little bit about what men can do to better treasure the women in their lives. What can women do to better show that they are respecting the men in their lives? Listening, obviously, is a big part of it.
And I think that's one of those things is like, listening, and then being able to, when you need your husband, like ask him for it and then thank him for it, you know. It's figuring out those little things and then being like, okay, and also knowing like what does it look like for him to be respected in an appropriate way, and how does he you know, what's the thing that he most values, and then being like, okay, what does that look like? And it's funny, it reminded me of a story. There was a guy who was working on his car, and the wife learned a new strategy, so she went out in the garage and she just sat with him while he was working on his car, and she just sat there, and you know, he would say something like, oh, I'm working on the engine block or whatever, and she was like, oh, okay, you're working on the engine block, you know. And then he kept going, and after 5 minutes he like rolled out from underneath the car and said, I love you so much. But it was just because she was sitting there and enjoying what he was enjoying and listening to it. Like, yeah, if you can value and get excited about what your husband's excited about and let him teach you, like, I think that's going to go a long way. Now the question is like, can you endure what he gets excited about? My wife, she does her best. She does her best.
Right, because it feels like there's an investment of time there, but it also needs to be genuine. You need to genuinely, even if you don't care about the engine block, and I don't care about engine blocks, but you need to express to your husband, okay, I don't really care about engine blocks. What I really care about is you. This means something to you. This matters to you. I'm going to listen to you about it.
And I'm going to value that.
Great advice, Michael, for married couples, for dating couples, for people who work together. Just, you know, we need to value, respect, listen, trust each other, and all of that really falls under the umbrella of love. So great thoughts today. Michael, thank you. We really appreciate you sharing those with us.
No problem, Curtis.
And we really appreciate you being with us today on Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling. Michael is one of the awesome counselors here at Crosswinds, and you can find them all at crosswindscounseling.org. We'll see you next time on the podcast. Thanks for watching Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more of our podcast. And you can comment in the section below. Perhaps you could share what you'd like us to discuss in future episodes. We've got new episodes coming out every week. So we'll see you next time on Conversations with Crosswinds Counseling.